So my name's Leon Sabaro.
My name is Shaq Tax.
My name is Gabriel Taval.
And what
Some-
school do you go to?
We go to Tier Environmental Research Institute.
Yes.
Nice. It's fantastic.
Mhm.
Well, my name is Vicki Hatch. I grew up in Miami Beach, so I'm a native. And my first career was a tennis professional. I played competitively and taught tennis, and I switched careers at about 30, which was about a year ago, just kidding. So this is career number 2 for me as a nutritionist. And I have 2 kids. I have a freshman going to Dartmouth, and I have my daughter is a sophomore at Rice University in Houston. So,
Wow. It's really
and now I'm an
nice.
empty nester. So here I am on Saturday. Instead of with them, I'm with you.
Yes.
So, yeah. So you picked a very good topic. The processed foods really is kind of the cornerstone of chronic disease, if you will. Well, of course, chronic disease, there's the genetic component, which, but the behavioral component in terms of helping to manage and prevent chronic disease is food. So, and the processed foods can play a very big part in that. So did you have an angle that you wanted to get at? I guess you wanted to ask me some questions first, or?
Yeah, you just
Can
want
I
to
ask
start
you
with some.
a question before we start? I just want to ask one question. What got you into being a nutritionist?
That's an excellent question. I played tennis. I was a competitive junior tennis player. And I met a nutritionist when I was very young, at like 10 years old. And I kind of liked what she did. She helped me be my best personal physical self as an athlete. And I just always kind of wanted to give that back. And so, with nutrition therapy, I get to work with athletes. I just got off the phone with somebody suffering from addiction. And actually no flour, no sugar is a nutrition therapy for those addiction patients, oddly enough. And I work with diabetic patients and cancer patients and reflux, eating disorders, sports nutrition. So it's a nice way to make an impact in people's lives. And during the pandemic, the office is really busy because there are so many numerous things going on between the isolation and then being sick and not getting out. And this telehealth became an important vehicle for us nutritionists. And it wasn't even allowed by law for us prior to the pandemic. Can you believe that? So we weren't even allowed to use it technically. So now it's like office busy. It's a busy time.
Yeah. So we're just gonna ask you some simple questions. So I just want to start off by asking, like, what is ultra processed foods? Like, how would you define ultra processed foods?
So processed foods is basically, typically people think of it as additives, adding sugar, adding salt, adding fat, adding stabilizers, emulsifiers, the stabilizers, because they want it to last a long time on the shelf, and the emulsifiers improve the texture. So sometimes most of the times it's those additives. So if you take, say, I don't know, just a nut. I don't know, I just kind of made that one up. And, if you just had a nut and you don't add anything to it, it's a natural food, right? But then if you start adding salt to it, and then they add sugar and salt to it, like the honey roast did. And then, so as you start adding, and then they might add preservatives because they added the foods to it. So now they need the preservatives to keep them more shelf stable. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle. Whereas if you just had some plain raw nuts, that's the opposite of that, right?
Yeah.
And did I answer that question, or are you going to keep going?
Yeah, you did. I
Yeah.
just want to know,
And,
like, what
and the
are some
other thing
examples?
too, though, that with processed foods, those are things that are added, but sometimes a processed food is when you take something away. For instance, like if you have a whole grain, it comes with this fabulous germ on the outside, say like rice, and the companies actually take the bran and the germ off to make a white rice, which is now processed. Whereas if they kept the grain on, it would be less processed, right? And now you've got this white rice now that has not as much nutrition because they just took a lot of it off. So now they're adding back, they're adding back some fiber and they're adding back some flavor and they're adding back. So, there are sometimes like the white refined stuff, sometimes it's something that they took out that if they had left it in, we'd be really in great shape.
Why would they take all the germ off of the rice? Like
The same reason why they put all the yummy stuff in the food, because they find that it's tastier, it's easier to cook. This is a really important part about processed foods. In our fast society and everybody's working 2 and 3 jobs, the processed foods are much easier they cook fast, they taste really yummy. They're very accessible. So I think that, and that's why they take the germ off, because people like the way it tastes, and then you start to get addicted to that higher sweet taste or that higher salt taste when they start manipulating the products and getting to the end in mind. That is how it does wind up leading to chronic disease. But I think some of it is, because they want to get us to eat more and buy more of their food and make more money. White rice is it's a staple, and then it becomes very inexpensive and everybody eats it.
Okay. And what can be like some examples that we eat of ultra processed foods? Like what are some known examples that we eat every day, for example?
Well, white bread might be one. Again, where you have white processed foods, biscuits is another one where, they just have, and basically any kind of food product where the label gets to be more than like 3 or 4 ingredients. If you look at a bag of green beans in the grocery store, there's 1 ingredient, green beans. There you go.
Yeah.
If you buy, raw, unsalted nuts, it's like 1 ingredient. So, and pretty much anything else, if you buy like frozen foods, like the raviolis or any of the foods in the frozen section, I'm trying to go through the store with you. Sometimes like chocolate milks, and they have all the sugar added back, they have all that sugar added. The big one is cereal. Oh my gosh, because a lot of those, they take out all the fiber and then they put in all the sugar, and it becomes problematic. And then what about donuts? A lot of people start their day out with donuts. And, and in some respects as well, like even like fruit juices and sweet teas and things like that. Some people start their morning with like a jelly donut and an orange juice, and you've got all that sugar flooding in that has been added back from these companies. And, when one takes in that flood of sugar, the immediate response, the body responds with a flood of insulin. And hence that cascade that does lead to chronic disease. So sugar is probably one of the most inflammatory products if we eat too much of it. Again, going to the end in mind, all foods can fit, but if a big portion of our diet comes from processed foods, we're pretty sure we're going to be looking at obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure. I have a ton of patients that come in and they're eating fried foods and fast foods as the mainstay of their diet. We may not, because maybe we grew up in a home where we learned how to cook, but many people do not grow up in homes where you're doing cooking from scratch. And, your parents are rushing home from work and they're bringing in a fast food because the kids, it makes everybody happy and it's fast. Fast foods are super, super highly processed. The French fries and the meats and the processed meats, they have to last longer because, they have to be shipped and frozen and then cooked again. And and they're addicting. And that's why these companies make them, because they're addicting. So you go back for more all the time.
Yeah.
I would, can you explain, like, because I'm not sure how it works. Can you explain how, like these processed foods affect people specifically with diabetes, like how that works?
Yeah. So typically, if you have added a lot of sugar to a product, including juices, so juices on the shelf have exactly the same amount of sugar as a Coca-Cola. If you ever turn them side by side, you would see that orange juice on the shelf has exactly the same amount of sugar as a Coca-Cola. So you ready for this answer? Because it's a little bit long-winded, but when you have more of that simple sugar, processed sugar in your body, we have cells in our body that house, have you heard of the hormone insulin? So insulin is part of the beta, it's part of the body. It's housed in a cell called the beta cell. And every time we eat sugar, even if it's from an apple, the body responds by covering that high sugar with insulin, because the insulin is the vehicle to get the sugar to the cell and take it out of the blood. So I eat an apple, I make insulin. The insulin transports that, it opens the gate to get the sugar into the cells to feed me, and it drops the blood sugar because it now left the blood and it feeds the cell.
So like the more processed foods you eat, the greater production of insulin
the greater need for insulin. Yes. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And so if I eat an apple, there's 15 grams of carbs in a small apple, maybe simple sugars, 3 or 4 grams, whatever. But if I drink a milkshake, or like a fruit smoothie that's got like 150 grams of sugar, and I'm telling you that they do, like a 20-ounce Coke is 65 grams of sugar. So if I'm drinking that 3 to 4 times a day, which happens all the time, by the way. So these beta cells that house the insulin, over time, they get sick and tired of working. So the cell stops efficiently being able to secrete enough insulin. So if the body can stop secreting enough insulin, guess what's going to happen to that blood sugar? It's going to stay high. Yeah. The insulin is there to help manage lowering the blood sugar as needed. If we wear out that beta cell that carries the insulin, that's the first stage they call as insulin resistance. A lot of times that's the first stage that we just can't keep up with the production, but the body's still making a little bit of insulin. So that's how it leads to diabetes, because if the insulin is just not able to keep up after a while, then the blood sugar stays high. And then you have, that's diabetes.
Like basically basically those things are like insulin shots, basically, when like someone's that's diabetic.
Yeah, so the reason I was literally that was a great question. The people that take insulin, their body the beta cells gone. It has absolutely zero insulin left to help them. Zero. So they have to take insulin. So even if it's an apple will go sky high on it. That's called a insulin dependent diabetic patient. So they take insulin to cover all the carbs that they eat, even if it's, like a salad with carrots and tomatoes and beets. If that salad has 20 grams of carbs, they need insulin to cover it. Does anybody have diabetes on this call?
No.
Okay. So our bodies cover it naturally. That's just that, but if you don't have any insulin at all, you do need to take insulin. Then there's all kinds. There's insulin dependent, but then some people are just insulin resistant and they need an oral medication. So there's, diabetes starts, and not everybody goes to type 1 diabetes too, by the way. And type 1 diabetes is not typically caused by food. Type 2 diabetes is generally greatly affected by the quality of a diet. Okay. Type 1 really, I was going to say, usually you get that when you're a child, it's a juvenile type of thing, but actually there's a lot of cases where an adult can also become, turn it into a type 1 diabetes, but it's really more like of a virus or a viral kind of thing, and not necessarily the sugar that triggered that.
Okay. All right. Okay. The next question. So sort of back to like the fast food chains and corporations adding all these like additives to their processed foods. What do you think of like the advertisement that they do to advertise these processed foods? Do you agree with them, or like, what's your opinion on
Well,
it?
it's free enterprise here. That's what people like so much about being in the United States of America, that, you can be enterprising and make money. So, there are some groups that advocate, advocacy groups that do advocate for, that not happening. They even had that advocacy group with the like the Impossible Burgers, and how can you call them burgers? And it's really, so there are groups. As a nutritionist, I would love for them to stop advertising you can get 3 meals for $1. But to let you know from the real life side of the story, people come in and they have families of 5 kids and 1 parent, and it's cheaper. Wouldn't you want to feed your kid a whole Happy Meal for $1 instead of buying, chicken in the store for $12 or $15 or $20? So, how do you solve that problem? That's for your generation. I do have I think for me, it all depends. It boils into education, because even if you give these impoverished families, maybe more money to run their households, they need education on how to even use that to feed their children better. They grew up in a house with, Cheetos and pizzas and sodas and juices and juice packs. And I'm like, oh my God, stop spending your money on the sodas and the juice packs and buy a bag of apples. They're like, what? This is the first time they've ever heard that.
Yeah.
So the education piece is super, super important. The other piece of it's free enterprise. So I don't know, that's for you guys to solve.
What do you think about the United States is I don't know how to explain it, maybe a counterculture of how we endorse the McDonald's and stuff, and why don't we spend more money and more resources on promoting the vegetables and we say in a supermarket. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm all for it. Again, I want to let you know how part of the country lives. A lot of them don't have refrigeration in their house. A lot of them don't have working ovens. So there are numerous obstacles to that. And also, I mean, I don't know if you've been through Publix lately, but fruit and vegetables are so expensive. And I mean, it's much less expensive for them to go to a fast food restaurant and feed their family. So that is an obstacle that definitely, there are some groups coming around with that, and I think that the farm to table concepts are coming in, where they can make vegetables and fruits more accessible and less expensive. And then we have to educate. It really, at the end of every sentence, it comes back to the education. So, advocating is a great way to begin that education. But then you also have to be able to address the challenges of people. A lot of those families, they got most of their food from the gas station on the corner. They're not going into Aldi's or a farmer's market to go grocery shopping. They could go to Aldi's because there's some opportunity in Aldi's. But, Winn-Dixie and, Walmart's less expensive. And so you do see a wide variety of people in Walmart. I think it's a great idea to advocate, and how they can have access to it and how they can do it in a cost-effective manner.
Okay. And I just want to get it clear, there are a lot of sources that talk about the negative effects of ultra-processed foods on a person physically. Let's suppose if you eat a burrito, it affects a person's obesity, or you get a higher chance of getting cancers. But I was wondering if there's if ultra-processed foods can affect a person socially, or the emotions of a person. I don't know if that's the thing.
There's a lot of directions going there. I mean, the first thing that jumps to my mind is, are you talking about eating disorders or compulsive overeating? Because that's a very big problem, especially with the foods that you just mentioned, like the Doritos and the junk food and stuff. There are, does that affect them socially? Yeah, because if you're a compulsive, those foods are addicting, the ones that you just mentioned. And a lot of these processed foods become very addicting. And so they can affect you socially because it could lead to obesity. And then, of course, especially living down here in South Florida, where it's all beautiful people, you know, in the middle part of the country, there's a little more acceptance of body shape, but not down here necessarily. So socially, the only thing I could think of is like, does that lead to obesity? And do they have compulsive overeating where they can't be around food, so they wind up not going to those parties? Do they have yeah, I don't even want to go into anorexia, but I think it would be more about the compulsive overeater. Did I answer? What were you thinking when you connected that with socially? Are you talking more about obesity?
Yeah, like mental health too, like eating these disorders that can affect your mental health, how you talk to people. Like, I don't know, like,
100%. 100%. Because sugar itself is a major addicting component. And I actually have a very large percentage of, matter of fact, the person I was just on prior to this call, she comes to me from the Alcoholics Anonymous and Anorexic Bulimic Association. She goes to both of those, and she is terrorized by food. And the nutrition therapy for those patients is no sugar. That's the therapy, because sugar lights up the same pleasure centers in the brain as cocaine. They've done many studies where they give the person an Oreo cookie and they watch the activity of the brain, and then they have somebody that just took cocaine, it lights up the exact same pleasure center. So there is a very addicting quality, and you're 100% correct. These processed foods can destabilize moods.
mm-hmm.
They can lead to addiction. They can lead to eating disorders, and they do, not can, they do. And there's a very strong connection with that.
How is like that type of diet, like no sugar diet, like what would that consist of? Because I can't think of anything that really has no sugars.
And that would be the flip side of the less refined, right? So all the protein-rich foods like the chicken, fish, meat, turkey, vegetables, fruits, and the grains will work. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, but all of the grains can work. Where you're going to find the processed foods are things in a package. You're not going to find processed food from a green bean, unless it's like in the freezer section with a cream sauce or a cheese sauce, right? So your food groups really, unless it's in a box, like let's just say mashed potatoes from a box, like dried mashed potatoes, that probably is processed, whereas a potato isn't. And when I work with these patients, it's, I can share the list with you at some point, but I have a list of maybe 80 different words for the word sugar, and honey and corn syrup and fructose corn syrup and on and on and on, sucrose and fruit, not fructose, but sucrose. And anyways, there's about 80 to 100 of them, and they're not allowed to have anything with that, any word related to sugar in the first 4 ingredients on any label. If it's down below 5, 6, or 7, they can have that. They can't have teriyaki sauce. They have to have no sugar ketchup, because sugar will trigger their addiction. Yeah. And many people have more than one addiction. I mean, the person I just got off the phone with is addicted to nicotine. She's addicted to sugar. She's addicted to alcohol. And that's not uncommon that they, once you have an addictive personality, it can carry over.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And on the flip side, eating well is a mood stabilizer. On the flip side, eating well is a mood stabilizer. It manages your blood sugar response, and it keeps your brain sharper, and you think clearer. So they're like polar opposites. Yeah. And we're speaking in absolutes here. I mean, there will be people on this planet that eat like crap and do really well. That happens, but it's not the norm.
Okay.
So
For the next question, you go, Jack.
So like, what's for like, I guess a teenager or anyone in that matter, like what's a healthy diet? What do you think is a healthy diet?
I would say that a healthy diet where if what I have in my, I can't, can I share a screen here? No.
Yeah, you can.
I could, yeah.
Let me, I'll show you exactly the handout I use in my office. So let me just find it. And then if you want to
Okay.
give me, let me share, I'll show you what I use in my office. And this, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this will do it.
Okay.
Wait.
Do you do it, Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm still looking for it. And actually, while I'm opening that one, I'll also show you the sugar one. Okay. All right, so let me go. Let me go there. Okay. Well, the plate fell off, so I'll start with the sugar one. This is the list of sugars that I don't allow my addictive patients to use. They can't use anything on this list. Look how many there is. It's crazy, right? Oh, guys, I can do this. Can you see this? Can you see the plate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That is my version of how to have somebody eat healthy, where half the plate is vegetables and a quarter of the plate has some form of protein, and then a quarter of the plate has some sort of starch and fruit. I can email this to you.
Yeah.
To remember, everybody has a different nutrition plan, right? So when I'm training for a marathon, I have a whole lot more carbs than a quarter of my plate. Or the night before, so an athlete, that wouldn't necessarily, well, some athletes, everybody's different. That's all I want to say. Everybody's different, but that's a baseline, because vegetables is everything. It's got fiber. It has no sugar added. It's got a beta carotene, and it's got folic acid. It's got all the micronutrients that help keep cancer away and heart disease away. And on that topic, when you're eating refined foods, you're not getting those nutrients that are keeping heart disease away. And so not only are you having all these harmful additives, you're missing out on that.
Okay.
What would you say, like, because there's a lot of I guess people get like scared when they have like dairy in their diet. I don't know, like a lot of people get scared about it.
If you ask 100 dietitians that question, you will probably get 100 different answers. So I can tell you my opinion. Do you want me to stop the share for now?
Sure.
Okay. And I use dairy in my office. I think it's important. It's an important source of calcium. I think it's an important source of protein. You talk about, let's get a campaign out for healthy things. That's an easy access to calcium and protein. And there's not a lot of calcium in most foods. The dairy is really the best source of absorbable calcium. People say spinach has calcium, but you can't absorb most of it anyways. Dairy is, and then the yogurt, forget about it. That if you look into the areas of the world that have the highest percentage of the centenarians they're all ate yogurt their entire life. There's a lot in yogurt. Some people are lactose intolerant, some people are dairy intolerant, so you find another way. But for me, I don't do a blanket removal of dairy.
Gotcha.
I definitely do not. If somebody refuses to do it, I find another way around, but I'm an advocate.
Okay. And just to end off, because we have like 7 minutes left for the Zoom, I just want to say, what advice do you have for people who are trying to lean away from ultra processed foods into more healthy foods? What can you advise?
Yeah, I think that number one, in this area of the, there's a lot of pop-up markets and farmers markets. They're really all over the place. So if you enjoy doing something like that, that's a great way to bring some fresh produce and interesting local produce into the house. And you don't need any preservatives because it doesn't even need a shelf life. So I think that when one goes, that's one way that's kind of fun. But when one goes grocery shopping, to make sure that you think across the week, do I have enough vegetables in the house? Because a lot of us will bring in rice, and we'll bring in bread, but we won't necessarily think about enough vegetables. So it's really important that you plan to have enough vegetables in the house. And then the second thing I back into is what kinds of proteins do you have? Do you have ones that are on the shelf? Do you want to keep some tuna around? Do you want to keep some frozen chicken in the freezer? Do you want to put some frozen fish? So you have a few things that are shelf stable, and then you could bring in a few, like a rotisserie chicken, which is actually a little more processed, but making sure there's enough protein. And then you know, you go through the food groups and making sure. So if you're eating in restaurants too many times in the week, then what do you need to do to bring that back to the house? I think that that's a big, if you're eating fast foods too frequently, that's definitely something that needs to be addressed. But even a healthy restaurant, you're going to get more sodium and more additives probably than if you're cooking at home. So you mentioned the word social. So at your age, you kind of need to be able to balance the social with being healthy, because you don't want to isolate yourself in your house because you're afraid of eating food outside the house. So there's a balance there. But in terms of going, trying to be your healthiest best, making sure you have those foods in your house are very important.
Okay.
You know, those unprocessed foods in the house. And you asked me that question a little while ago in terms of, you know, what's not processed. Any of the proteins that you cook, any of the vegetables that you cook, any fresh or frozen vegetable, by the way, and any fresh or frozen fruit, because frozen fruits and frozen vegetables, they're flash frozen right after they're picked. So in a lot of respects, they even have more nutrition than the ones that are sitting in the grocery store that sat in the warehouse, sat in the truck, sat in the grocery store, and then sat in our house until we used it. So frozen is certainly a healthy way to go.
Okay.
And also, I just wanted to finish too, because I can see the time, that, you know, you want to show why does it lead to disease? Because these processed foods, they taste better and they're easier to get and they're addicting. So if you have it once in a while, nothing's going to happen to you. But if it becomes that role where, oh, we're eating out a lot because it's easier and we're, you know, blah, 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 obesity leads to diabetes, can lead to high blood pressure. Obesity can lead to some of the gastrointestinal cancers and even breast cancer, right? If you eat fast foods a lot, the sodium, forget about it. You know, that the high blood pressure is really, really a big problem. And so it's just a big snowball of how it leads to, and diabetes is just diabetes and obesity is way too rampant in this country. It's crazy. And it's all because of the processed foods and the fast foods. Not all, but a big portion of it.
Big portion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, and thank you for bringing up the mental illness piece of that, because I think that's that's a whole nother story all by itself if you're ever looking for another topic, because that community is really hidden. They're amongst us, but they're hidden.
Yeah, it's overlooked.
And suffering. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's it.
All
We
right.
can end it
Thank
here.
you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was